Animals can often shock us with their incredible nature. This cat went to the store with a leaf to buy fish. What the seller did next will shock you. The small cat had been seen around the fish shop for a few days. Julio, the owner of the shop, loved animals, and he never allowed staff to chase the animal away. The cat would sit in the shade, watching the people through the glass window. It was as if he was studying people and what they were doing inside the store. But when Julio or one of the other staff members got too close, he would run away. He didn't want to be approached. He was just hanging out. But it seemed like he was figuring out the bartering system they had going on in there. Cats have been trading with humans ever since they became somewhat domesticated. When a cat loves you, he can often be found bringing you small gifts. It can be anything from a mouse on your pillow to a toy in their food bowl. Either way, these clever creatures have found ways to get us to do what they want for many years, and the little cat in front of the fish store would be no different. The feline frequented the shop so consistently that Julio and the regulars began dubbing the cat Salmon due to its constant presence at the fish shop. The cat hung around the store daily, and he was so polite that everyone found him charming. Then, one day he did something really surprising. For the first time ever, he came inside the store. He had a leaf in his mouth. While people watched, he got in line with his leaf. He waited patiently for the people in front of him to be served. When the queue moved forward, he went forward too. He didn't cut the line or get impatient. He watched as the humans paid and took their fish. Finally, it was his turn. What would he do now? People who had been watching couldn't wait to see. Many of those who were already done with their shopping hung around just to see what would happen. The cat seemed to have a plan, and they wanted to witness it. He jumped on the counter and dropped the leaf in front of Julio. Then he waited expectantly. It took a second, but then everyone understood. He was trying to pay for a fresh fish. They had to laugh at the smart cat. He had seen people handing over things that looked like paper, and a leaf was the closest he could find. The clever cat thought he could do the same. He brought his payment, and now he was waiting for his reward. What would Julio do? A leaf was not normally the type of currency that a shop owner would prefer to receive payment in. But this cat wasn't trying to be sneaky and steal the fish. Who could look at that innocent face with twinkling eyes and the leaf in his mouth without giving in? Julio couldn't say no. He picked out a small fish for the cat and handed it to him. Salmon was very happy with this purchase. He ran off with his meal and went outside to feast. It was such a sweet, heartwarming story, and everyone at the store would be talking about it for a while. They didn't think that they would see something like that again anytime soon. But they were wrong. The very next day, Julio was working in the back when a staff member called him and told him his favorite customer was waiting. Sure enough, there was Salmon, back in line with a leaf in his mouth. He was waiting to make his purchase, and Julio was happy to provide his goods. Julio and his family had owned the fish shop for years. As a young kid, he would go out with his father to catch the fish they would sell in the shop. In later years, Julio did all the fishing, and his father did all the selling. They slowly expanded the business, and now that Julio was in charge, he went out with the boat once or twice a week. The rest of the time, it was the fishermen on his boat who brought in their daily catch. They had some of the same customers coming to them all those years, people who had watched Julio grow up. But in all that time, they had never had a customer as loyal as Sam, the cat. He didn't miss a day of buying fish, even if the day was cold or rainy. The cat was always there to make his purchase. Sometimes his leaf got soggy from the rain, or he only had a small piece left because the leaf was brittle and broke off. But every day He was ready to buy his food. Julio made sure they kept a small fish ready for the cat to buy. Even when Julio was out, his wife and other staff knew which fish to give the cat. Everyone could see that the store owner was getting really attached to this little customer. He worried about the cat and wondered where he went when he wasn't coming into the shop. Where was he sleeping? Was he safe? Julio decided to do something about his worries. He chose a spot at the back of the shop and prepared it for Sam to use if he wanted to. Since Sam was eating a fish a day, he didn't look quite as thin or weak anymore. But Julio knew he needed more than one meal a day to stay healthy. Winter was coming, and it was soon going to get cold. Sam would need a warm place to sleep. The area Julio chose was under a roof. He placed a climbing cat bed there with some water and cat kibble. Sam still got his daily fish, but even a cat might be in the mood for something different once in a while. He was still too thin for Julio's liking. Julio's house was next door to the shop, and he could keep an eye on the cat and see if he was using his new accommodation. For Julio, it was a massive win the first time he saw Salmon sleeping in his cat bed. For Julio's wife and his staff members, it was fun to see the big, rugged fisherman getting so excited about a tiny cat he could help out. His wife was silently preparing herself for another occupant in their home come wintertime. But no one could have expected the events that unfolded before the coldest weather hit. Salmon didn't always stay in his new lodgings, but at least he knew he would always have a safe place to sleep if he needed it. Even when they didn't see him sleeping in his cat bed, they saw him in the store to buy his small fish. Until one day, when the fish that Julio kept for the cat caused major anxiety. Julio had run errands that day and wasn't in the shop much. He returned just around closing time, and his heart started beating wildly as he walked in. The tiny fish that was kept for Salmon was still lying on ice, waiting for its owner. When asked, the staff realized that Salmon hadn't come in that day. Julio immediately feared something was very wrong. The cat hadn't missed a day in over 2 months. Where could he be now? The shop owner wanted to find out. He kept the shop open for an extra hour, waiting for the cat to arrive, but Salmon never came. He wasn't in his cat bed in the back, and the fresh water and cat pellets that Julio had set out that morning hadn't been touched. Julio walked around the block, calling for the cat, but he couldn't see him anywhere. Then Julio grabbed his car and drove around the neighborhood, looking for the cat. It was getting dark, and he couldn't see much. Eventually, he had to give up and go back home. He just hoped there was an innocent reason for the cat to have missed the day. Julio didn't sleep much that night. He was really worried. His wife reassured him that the cat would surely show up the next day, and he hoped she was right. But by midday the next day, when the fish was still there, Julio knew there was a massive problem. His wife covered for him at the store while he went out searching. The staff promised to phone him the moment Salmon came in, but that call never came. Just as Julio feared, the cat was in terrible trouble. Even if Julio found him, there was no guarantee he'd be able to save him. Julio was frantic with worry. He drove around the neighborhood, stopping everywhere to check places where a cat might hide. He knew Salmon wouldn't go far, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to return to the shop every day. Julio was starting to lose hope. Salmon was such a tiny cat, and there were so many places he could be hiding, hurt and alone. Then Julio drove past a park, and something caught his eye. He stopped because he saw the familiar colors of fluff on the side of the road next to the park. He had hoped to find the cat hiding somewhere, injured but alive, but the little bundle wasn't moving. His heart pounding loudly in his ears, Julio got out of his vehicle. He was almost too scared to look. If it were any other day or any other animal, Julio would have assumed it was roadkill and wouldn't have given it a second thought. But on this day, he had to make sure. He got closer and held his breath. It was Salmon, but he wasn't sure if the cat was breathing. Just then, the cat turned his little head and looked up at Julio. Salmon was in terrible shape. He had wounds all over his body, and one leg looked broken. He had likely been run over by a car and pushed to the side of the road. There was no telling how long he had been lying there in pain, likely since the previous day. It broke Julio's heart. But what could the kind shopkeeper do? Salmon wasn't really his cat. He was just a sweet customer who came to visit. Julio thought of all their interactions. The cat visiting the store each day with a leaf to buy fish. Now that same cat needed his help more than ever. What Julio did next will surprise you. Pet owners know that vet care can be super expensive, and Julio could tell just by looking at the cat that his care was going to cost a lot more than a fresh fish a day. But Julio couldn't turn his back on him. He took Salmon to the vet and decided to pay for his care, just hoping they could still do something to help the poor cat. To Julio, Salmon was worth it. The cat had wounds all over his body. One leg was broken, and another was badly twisted. He needed surgery, but the vet assured Julio they were hopeful for a full recovery. Salmon stayed in the vet hospital for a few days, and during that time, Julio did everything he could to find the cat's family. It was hard to believe that such a sweet, smart cat could be homeless, but sadly, that was exactly what he turned out to be. Salmon didn't have a microchip, so there was no way to identify his owners. Julio placed posters all over the neighborhood and searched, but no one came forward. It seemed the cat would have nowhere to go once he got out of the hospital. As the days went by, Julio secretly started hoping this would be the case. He had never owned cats before. He had dogs growing up, but there was something special about this cat. Salmon got excited and happy to see Julio when he visited the vet. He would try to get out of his enclosure the moment he saw him, and he even let Julio pick him up and hold him. Julio chose to believe it wasn't just about the small pieces of fish he brought each day. This cat truly cared about him. Salmon was getting ready to go home with Julio and his family, but then a phone call threatened to derail their plans. Someone called and claimed that Salmon might be their cat. They explained that their cat, Sandy, had gone missing months ago, right around the time Salmon first started coming to the shop. They sent pictures of their cat, and sure enough, she looked a lot like Salmon. Julio tried to be happy for the cat, knowing that finding his owner should have been the best outcome. But he couldn't deny the pang of sadness at the thought of saying goodbye. His family had already been counting on welcoming Salmon into their home. The day before Salmon was set to be released from the vet, the family came to meet Julio at the clinic. They were excited, but things didn't go according to plan. The woman noticed Salmon looked different from how Sandy used to look, but she reasoned it might be due to the accident. When the vet opened Salmon's enclosure, the cat shot straight into Julio's waiting arms. He showed no interest in the people claiming to be his owners. When the woman tried to pet him, Salmon hissed, a behavior Julio had never seen from him. Salmon had always been polite to the other customers in the fish shop, but he clearly didn't want anything to do with this couple. The woman was heartbroken, crying in her husband's arms, saying she couldn't believe their sweet girl would act this way. That's when the vet stepped in and asked for Sandy's medical history. The mystery was quickly solved. The couple explained that Sandy had been spayed at 6 months old and had a microchip. But Salmon was a boy and had been neutered during his recent surgeries. The couple had to face the sad truth that they would never see their cat again. They later adopted another cat from a shelter and gave her all the love they could. As for Salmon, the cat had made it very clear where his loyalties lay. He felt safe with Julio, and he would later get just as attached to Julio's family. When the time came for him to go home, they all knew there was just one place he belonged. They took the family drive back to the shop, but if the cat thought he was going to become a store cat, he was mistaken. Julio took him to the house next to the store. There, he had the perfect spot waiting for him. They already knew exactly what type of bed the cat liked and set up a new cat bed for him to hide in and sleep. He also had warm bedding and toys. At that stage, it was winter, and his poor body had been through so much. Salmon still had a long road to recovery, and his wounds could still ache during the winter. So they even got him a feline heating pad where he could rest his weary body and warm his wounds. But it was the toys that quickly drew his attention. The cat had probably never had toys to play with, but now he had a bunch. No one was surprised when his favorite quickly became the fish plushie that he carried around all day. They kept him inside all winter, fearing he would wander off too far if he had the chance. But when summer came, they allowed him outside. He had a tracking collar on, and they could watch him all the time, but he wouldn't need it. From then on, he would go just as far as the fish shop next door to visit his dad and all his fellow customers. And if someone slipped him a yummy, fresh piece of fish, he wasn't complaining either. The cat had come to the shop with just a leaf to barter for food, but now he had a safe, happy home where he got all the fresh fish he needed for free and a family willing to give him everything he could ever need, whether he could pay them in leaves or not. What more can any animal need? Thanks for watching. Join us again for even more incredible stories.